Okay, I'm going to get started. I've got a few people logged in here, and I'm sure we'll pick up a few more as we go along. Um, I'm just going to do a few little housekeeping announcements, and then we can get started with the really good stuff. Um, so I just want to kind of introduce everybody to the session tonight. This is Strategies for Successful Wholesale Show. It's presented by the SUNY Canton Small Business Development Center and also Adirondack North Country Association, or ANCA, who is the host of the Buyers Day show, which is, I think, probably where a lot of you, um, heard about this webinar and got the information. And so just a little bit about the SBDC for those of you that aren't familiar with us already. We are kind of a unique combination of funding sources from different levels of government. We get federal funding through the Small Business Administration, and then we also get funding from the New York State budget and also support from the SUNY system, which houses most of our small business development centers. Our services include, the full gamut of business advisement, from startup through growth at all stages of business. We do a lot of startup assistance because I think that's really when people need the most help. But we're here for, everything that comes along after that point: help with financing, business planning, marketing, human resources, learning how to hire someone. We do a lot of work with people who are wanting to sell products and services to the government and learning how to go through that process and do that. So there's a whole lot that we do. And I like to always tell people that, we don't know everything here, but chances are if you come to us and you have a question or you need information, we don't have it here, we'll be able to find someone who can get it to you. So we like to think that we should be your kind of first stop for just about any issue that you have, and for those that we can handle, we will in-house, and for other things we may send you out for other resources, but we should be able to point you in the right direction. I also want to let you know we're recording this session, so you will, usually it takes about a day or so for the recording to come back to my email. Once we have that, we will get you a copy of the recording, so you'll have it to listen to for the future, as well as the handouts that I'll talk about in a minute, so you'll have access to all of these materials after the fact. When you enter the webinar, you'll probably notice, I think they give you a little announcement that you're attending the webinar and you're muted. So that means that I can't hear anything going on with you, if you're talking or anything like that. That's mainly to keep down on background noise. So if you do have a question or you want to say anything, there's two ways that you can do that. One of those is you have a little button where you can raise your hand, and that will send me an alert and I can unmute you. Or there's a little chat area. If you look in the toolbar that's down the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little chat box there. You can type a question or a comment in there, and then I'll be able to answer from there. If that little toolbar gets in your way and it's distracting your view of the slides, there's a little orange arrow kind of up toward the top. If you hit that, it'll collapse it, and if you click it again, it'll open it back up, so you can move that in and out of your way. The other thing that I want to draw your attention to is the handouts, and so you'll also see that heading in your toolbar. And if you click on that, you will see links to all of the handouts for tonight that you should be able to click on and open up as we go through, or if you want to open those up now while we're getting started, that's fine too. And again, remember that those will all be sent to you after the webinar along with the recording, so you'll have access to all of these things after the fact. Trying to think what else I need to let you know. Oh, the other thing to know too is that at the end of the webinar you'll get a survey in two ways. One of those will be a pop-up window that opens up right after the webinar, so you can do the survey right then if you like, and it will also be emailed to you. You don't have to do both of those, so just do one or the other, whichever is easiest for you. I just ask that if you prefer to do the email version, try not to forget about it. That feedback is very important for us. to know what you're looking for, what you thought of the program, and how we can improve it. And it also helps us to answer to the powers that be that give us our funding and show that people are attending our webinars and that they have feedback to share. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, I'd really appreciate it. So I think that covers all of our little housekeeping tidbits. So I'll go ahead and kind of get to the meat and potatoes and all of the fun stuff that's that we have in store tonight. I also do want to make a point too of letting you know that if you have questions, or there are things that we covered tonight that you just want maybe a little bit more in-depth discussion about, certainly let Lauren or myself know. I would be glad to meet with you, either meet with you in person or talk with you on the phone or via email. But we want to make sure that you get all the answers that you need and that you're as prepared for upcoming wholesale shows as possible. So tonight we're going to talk about why you should wholesale, things you should consider, whether it's right for you. It's not necessarily right for everybody. Not everybody necessarily likes to do it, so we'll cover that. We'll talk about how you can get ready to do wholesale sales, how to get ready for the show, and things to do at the show and after the show, because there will be some follow-up as well. So we'll kind of cover all of those things. And as I said, you're here with the SBDC and with ANCA. So a lot of people, really are not necessarily always sure that they want to wholesale or haven't really thought about it a lot. So this is just a really brief list, and I'll emphasize brief for sure, of things to consider when you're thinking about maybe wholesaling. So, some of the things kind of on the plus side, some of the pros of wholesaling is the fact that you'll have a predictable sales schedule and production schedule, as opposed to retail, where if you're selling at a show or you have a retail shop, you don't always know when the sales are going to come. You may have days that are very slow and other days that are very busy. From my experience with retail in the North Country, in most cases it's not really predictable. So you kind of have those ups and downs. Wholesale is a little bit more controllable. You're controlling when you approach the retailers. Once you get those relationships established, you have a little better feel for who's buying what and when, and so things kind of become a little bit more regular. It's a little easier to plan the production because certain times of the year you're going to have more shows, or you're going to have more orders from your current wholesale customers, so you can be prepared for that. The nice thing about selling wholesale is that you're really only producing the items that you're going to sell. You don't have to keep a lot of excess inventory like you would if you had a retail shop or if you had a retail online presence. If you've got something that's listed on your website and 10 people want to order that today, you need to make sure that 10 are available. And then you might have 10 available, but only 2 people order. So those kinds of things, kind of go away with wholesaling. So that kind of saves you from having to do markdowns and maybe cutting some of your profit margins that way. The other nice thing about selling wholesale is that it's a good way to get a lot broader exposure for your products. You may have your product in front of an audience that you would have never been able to reach through your own retail shop or through the shows that you do, and not only in other geographic areas, but maybe also other demographics. You were reaching people maybe of different income levels or different lifestyles than you would be able to reach at some of the shows and other things that you've typically done. So that's something that's kind of a benefit when you're wholesaling. But like everything, there's the upside and the downside. One of the things to think about with wholesaling is that you definitely have smaller profit margins, because when a retailer comes to you and buys your product wholesale, they're expecting that it's going to be marked up, and so there's got to be room there for them to make profit as well. So The idea is that if you're wholesaling, you want a higher volume of sales so that you can make up that difference in the profit margin. So with retail, you make more money on each item, but with wholesale, you want to make sure that you're selling more of those items because your profits are smaller per piece. The other thing that's kind of important to be aware of with wholesaling is that you're really relying on other people to move your products for you. And what that really means is that you have to be, really educated and really aware of where your products are and who the retailers are that you're dealing with. So, you want to find out how do they market, their shops, how do they, present your product to their customers, how do they run, what are their hours of operation. You want to know as much about them because you almost want to consider them kind of a rep for your business in some sense. So you need to know how those things are going to go, because if someone is out there representing your product and maybe not doing it in the best way, then you want to be aware of that. The other thing to consider with wholesaling is that you're going to have extra expense for wholesale shows and for travel. The wholesale shows, like the buyer days, are fabulous ways to get in front of a lot of retailers all at once. But in between those shows, you may be doing visits to different retailers or setting up sales meetings or things like that where you have to go to their locations. Because in most cases they aren't going to come to you. And so you want to make sure that you really think clearly about those expenses and budget for those. And again, that's something that we can help out with at the SBUC, and then Lauren can give you some guidance on as well. If you're just getting into wholesaling, thinking about, what shows should I be doing, when should I be traveling, when should I not do it, when would it not be as beneficial. And so really I think it's just a matter of planning wisely and then being aware of those things. So considering all that, you really have to think about, is wholesaling right for you? And so there's a few things that go into that consideration. One of those is thinking about pricing, thinking about your production schedule and how you produce your products, how saleable your items are going to be in retail stores, and keeping your branding and your product line cohesive, which is sometimes a challenge. So we're going to talk about all of those things. So one thing you want to think about when you sell your products at wholesale is, are you going to have enough profit there? Because remember, you're going to have a smaller profit margin than when you're selling at retail. So you want to think about, the products that you're going to offer retailers. And will that product sell at a retail price? Sometimes your cost of production may dictate that, when it gets to the end consumer through another retailer, that the price is going to be too high. So you want to be thinking about that. Retailers will probably give you feedback about that, but you can also do some research on those things yourself, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. And I think, a lot of smart business decisions are based on knowing the market and doing that market research for all of these reasons. So like I said, we'll talk about that a little more. And then you also want to think about, are retail buyers going to be willing to pay your wholesale price? So you have to be aware of what they're going to be expecting. What kind of markup do they want? And a fairly common practice is keystone pricing, which is basically the retailer will double whatever you've charged them wholesale. That's not, like everything in business, I guess it's not 100% rule, so there's always exceptions to that depending on what industry you're in, and a lot of different factors about your product. So you have to be really cognizant of, what retailers are going to expect to be selling your products at, and, seeing if you fit into that pricing model for them. So I'm going to draw your attention well, actually, I think I'm going to wait. I was going to show you one of the pricing workshops, or worksheets, but I think I'm going to wait and get into that once we've talked about pricing a little more, because it might get a little confusing right now. So we'll just continue on. But we do have some pricing worksheets that you'll be able to use to kind of figure those things out. So aside from pricing, you also want to think about your production. Do you have a product that you're going to be able to produce in volume fairly easily? If you have something that's customized, each piece is unique and different, or it's tailored to a certain customer's request, that's going to be much harder for you to produce in volume. I have had some people who have had custom products, and what they've done is created a line of products that are a little bit more standardized. And so what that does is kind of give you two levels of product lines. One that's customized and very specific and probably at a higher price point because it's a specialized product. But then the product line that they sell at wholesale, which is a little bit more standardized and easier to do in a greater volume and do repetitively. So thinking about, if you're not wholesaling right now, what things do I have in my product line that I could easily produce in a larger quantity and still have, the same end product or an end product that's just as good. Also thinking about if it's cost effective for you to produce in volume as well. Thinking about, are there expenses for you that may go up if you start to produce more, and are you accommodating for that in your pricing? And again, we'll get into some pricing models and some worksheets that you'll be able to use to kind of evaluate that. And another factor in that is, time as well. If you have a product that's very, very time intensive, you may find it hard to wholesale. And again, that would mean that you want to maybe think about, creating a piece of product line that is maybe a little easier produced in volume. Another thing to consider is if you have sufficient access to the raw materials and the supplies that you need to produce your product. If you have something that's very specialized, or if you're making it out of materials that are maybe only available certain times of the year, you really want to think about, are you going to be able to sustain your production at the times when retailers are expecting that from you, and really evaluate that. And again, none of these things are things that mean, if you haven't checked all of these off your list, you shouldn't wholesale, but you want to come up with, some alternative plans if some of these things are issues for you. So you may think about, producing, a version of your product that maybe includes different supplies and materials that are available more commonly through a longer period of time or something like that. So it's just important to kind of make those kinds of considerations and having thought them through to see if you're going to be fitting in that wholesale market, without driving yourself crazy, basically. Thinking about whether your product is saleable, and that probably, to a lot of you that have been selling for a while and are selling at retail, you might think, well, that's kind of silly. I'm selling my product right now, so of course it's saleable. But you also have to think about the venues where you're selling at retail as opposed to where, your wholesale products are going to end up. So if you sell, mainly at certain types of shows, you want to make sure that the retail shops that are buying your products are going to be lined up with that same market. One trap I see people fall into sometimes is that they try to sell wholesale items that they aren't able to move at their own retail sales. And sometimes I think people think, well, I've got, a nice inventory of, XYZ widgets over here that really haven't been moving. I'll try to sell those at wholesale. Well, the problem with that is that if you can't sell at retail, then, your retail shops probably are not going to be able to as well for the most part, unless they're reaching a significantly different market. So, don't think of it as a dumping ground for the stuff that you can't sell. Take a look at the things that you produce that sell and consider if those would fit well, as a wholesale item. Also thinking about, are you producing something that's going to be convenient for the retailers? It has to be easy for them to display and to merchandise. Is it something that they can, maybe mix and match with other items that are in their inventory so they can create a nice display? Is it something that they need, maybe special, racks or special shelving that that would be required for them to put something on display? And if that's the case, you may consider working with them and trying to get that for them. you don't want to make a lot of extra work for the retailer. You want it to be something that they can easily incorporate into their stores or their online presence or wherever they're selling, without a lot of monkeying around with special hangers or special packaging or special shelving. And you also want to think about, are you providing something that they can display that's going to really kind of clearly brand you as well. So you may think about maybe providing them with display materials, maybe a special rack or special shelving or signage or something like that that would go along with it. But really, kind of thinking about how that product is going to end up looking in a retail setting from someone else. And I'm looking here, I think. I don't see that we have any questions right now, so we'll keep going. But again, if you do have questions, certainly put something in the chat box, raise your hand, unmute yourself. Sometimes I get caught up in talking and I don't notice, so if I'm really, it's kind of gone on a little while and I haven't answered you, go ahead and unmute yourself and yell at me. That would be fine to get my attention, so I don't miss what you're doing. But I'll try to pause every once in a while and just check for those questions. So we want to think about, how you're going to get ready to sell at wholesale. And this is where we'll talk about the market research, the pricing, and how you manage that whole arena of wholesaling. And so I'm going to point you toward one of the handouts that's here. And again, remember that these will be sent to you after the fact as well, so you'll have access to those. There's a document in there that says, starts out wholesale terms, invoice, order forms. There's a few different things in there. Lauren provided this fabulous handout somewhere that kind of gives you a definition of all the different wholesale terms that are important to know. Some of these are things, that probably a lot of you are familiar with already, big box stores and catalog and those kinds of things. But, these are some words and phrases to kind of get yourself familiar with, because you may be hearing those at a wholesale show, and so you'll know what people are talking about. A lot of these things we're gonna cover tonight. Some of them maybe not necessarily, but it's kind of good background to have if you're going to be in that wholesale setting and talking to people. So the first thing you want to do, excuse me, when you're preparing for a wholesale show is to do a little bit of market research on that show. And so you want to try to know as much as you can about the show and the retailers that are coming to that show. Sometimes that information is available ahead of time, sometimes it's not. I believe, if I remember right, and Lauren, you can jump in and let me know, but I think you've told me in the past before that people can find out who the retailers are who have registered ahead of time, so they kind of have some of that information. So you want to talk to other producers that who are attending the show or who have attended it in the past. If you know some of these retail outlets, do they use similar producers who are out there? I'm not suggesting that you go look where your competitors are being sold in retail stores and poach their retailers from them. Don't do that. It's a little unethical, but you do kind of want to try to know what retailers are doing and where your competition is out there. And I did just get a comment from Lauren. Yeah, she's confirming that you will be getting a list of those vendors when it gets closer to the show. When you're thinking about retailers and what retail shops you want to approach or who you want to be talking to, you want to think about what other designers and producers they carry. So be familiar with their inventory, with their shop layout, how their shops look. Obviously with some of these shows you've got retailers who are coming from quite far away. So you're not going to travel to all of their stores, but a lot of them are probably going to have websites you can check out. It's something you can talk to them about at the show. At some point in the future you can do visits and get a look at how things are. But the thing that you're looking for is, You know, does this shop reflect other products that are similar to mine in terms of who they're being marketed to? Do I see that my customers, people who would buy my product, would also be in this retail setting buying other products? That's really what you want, is the right people in that retail store and the right retail setup to attract those people. So again, you know, looking for yourself, if you have a chance to visit some of the stores, certainly do, but you can look at websites, you know, purchase things from these stores if they have an online presence, you know, talk to the employees and the owners to get a good feel for things. It's a good idea to target retailers that have a high volume of traffic, because ideally you want your merchandise to move quickly. You want them to buy from you, put it on their shelves, have it sell out, and then have them call you and say, hey, I just have to get more of that stuff because my customers want it. And if you do the right market research and you know enough about this store, then that should be a good match. Also, you want to make sure that you're targeting vendors who, or retailers who pay their vendors on time. So you want to ask for references, and when we get a little further on, we're going to talk about some different ways to approach orders from retailers and making sure that you're getting paid and that you're you know, being treated fairly. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Some retailers may ask you to be an exclusive retailer of your products in a certain area, maybe a certain town or a certain city or maybe even a county. You want to think about, you know, whether you're going to offer that or not and what the advantages may or may not be to you. It may be something that would work for you, or it might be something that you feel is limiting to you. And again, I think that goes back to knowing the market, knowing, you know, who are the other retailers in this area that could potentially be, you know, selling my product as well, and do I want to, you know, eliminate those outlets, you know, at the cost of doing just one. So again, you know, think about it. You know, it may sound exciting when a retailer comes up and says, I want your stuff exclusively, I don't want anybody else to have it. You know, to kind of get really excited and say, oh great, they really love my stuff. But think about it and really evaluate it before you agree to that, and make sure that it's going to be the best option for you. So we're going to take a little closer look at pricing, because that's one of the things that you need to really think about to get ready for, you know, coming into the wholesale market. And so this is a little chart that will kind of break down the pieces of a typical price for you. And so basically there's you know, essentially 4 pieces. There's the cost of goods, which is basically what it cost you to make the product in terms of supplies and materials and things like that. And then there's the labor component, which is, I think, one a lot of people forget when you're the actual producer yourself. If you're a small cottage business and you're the person knitting the socks, or you're the person making the wreaths or carving the wood carvings, sometimes you forget about your labor. It's important to know how much time goes into your production and making sure that you know, you're getting paid what your time is worth. And I think that's something that a lot of small business owners and, you know, producers, I think sometimes take for granted and overlook. So you want to make sure you do that. Then there are your overhead expenses. You know, how much does it cost just to keep the lights on? You know, to keep your insurance intact, or to keep your website up and running. All of the costs that you have that, you know, are going to be there whether you sell 1 item or 50. And then the profit. That's the good stuff. That's, you know, where your paycheck comes from, essentially. So you want to make sure that that's in there as well. And that will be your wholesale price. And this same formula goes into retail. The difference is there's a different, you know, amount of profit there. So, you know, for those of you that don't have as much knowledge with pricing, I'll just kind of go through each of those components really quickly and kind of explain them a little bit more. So cost of goods would be anything that goes into making the end product, any of the physical things that go into it. So you would also want to include, so like if I'm baking oatmeal cookies, that would be the oatmeal, the flour, the butter, the raisins. It would also be, you know, my packaging, you know, maybe boxes or plastic bags, or the little ribbon that I tie on the end, the labels that I attach to the front with my name on it, and, you know, the labels that I have listing the ingredients, all of those things that go into the end product. So you want to make sure that you have a good accounting of all of those things, and knowing, you know, if I'm baking those cookies, I might buy 20 pounds of flour all at once, knowing how many cookies actually come out of that pound of flour, and how much goes into each recipe, so that you know how much each of those cookies cost you to make. Again, valuing your own labor. This part is, not always the favorite part of most people to do in this process, but you really want to take some time and track your time. I always tell people, do a time study for a little while. Write down, when you start a project or you start a piece, write down, I worked on it from 10 to 12, and, if you walked away because maybe you painted it and there was some drying time, when you come back to it, write down the amount of time again, but knowing how much time goes into that. If you haven't done a time study like that before, I think you will probably be surprised about how much time you're actually putting into your products. A lot of people, way underestimate how much time they're putting into what they're doing. So take a good close look at that. And then also remember to include any outsourced labor or manufacturing costs. So if you've got, part of your product that maybe you send out to, maybe I create this wood carving and I send it to someone else to, finish it or paint it, including those costs as well. And then again, thinking about your overhead. How much does it cost you to operate your business? You still have to pay for insurance. You still have to pay for, your website, internet access, your telephone, all of those things. If I sit here and I don't sell one single product today, I still had to pay for all of those things that keep the doors open, basically your rent or, those types of things. So you want to make sure that those are covered in your pricing. And then that profit. And profit is basically, the money that gets your business off the ground. It does a couple of different things. It helps you to reinvest in the business. It helps you to buy more product, to maybe, add different products to your product line. It allows you to grow the business. It gives you a cash cushion so that if something unexpected comes up or if you're waiting for payment on something, you've got cash to carry you through. And then a lot of times that's where your pay comes from as well, as a lot of you are, individual makers and home-based cottage industry, that's where you're getting your money from too. So you want to, that's what buys your groceries and those kinds of things. So you want to make sure that that profit is sufficient, and it's that balance again between, okay, is it sufficient to be profitable at wholesale and also pay yourself what you need to pay yourself. It doesn't look like we have questions so far. I'll look at these pricing sheets with you now. There's a couple of different ones. One is labeled Pricing Breakdown. And so this is a sheet that I developed for one specific client quite a few years ago, but the formula really is the same regardless of what your product is. So when I send this to you as just an Excel spreadsheet, feel free to play around with it and change it to match your particular product. But I'll walk you through, how I use this with the client, just so you kind of get an idea. And so basically this lady produced hand-sewn clothing. And so it was all kind of like unique, one-of-a-kind stuff. So, we started off with the raw materials. What goes into making these shirts and dresses? Material, obviously. She needs some cloth. So we had to figure out, how much cloth that she used, how much was it per yard or per meter, and how much went into each piece of clothing, and that total went here. And the same thing for all of the other things, the ribbons to decorate, there's buttons, interfacing, heat bond, thread. Even though it seems like a very small piece of a sewn item, it can add up quickly. Some of her pieces had applique on them, which she outsourced to another person. So she paid $1.50 per applique. And sometimes that varied if it was something larger, but on average it was about $1.50. And so she added that in there, and all of those things together would total up her raw materials. And so we would add that whole column and know what her raw materials were. Then we moved on to looking at labor. And so basically, we would take a look at, and I had her do a time study. I said, sit down and make one shirt from beginning to end. Sit down and make one dress from beginning to end. And so she sat down and, did a few and said, okay, on average, most of my shirts take me, whatever, 3 hours or 5 hours or whatever it was to do. If she was doing the applique herself, then we factored that in. Or if she was contracting it, because sometimes she did one or the other depending on what the product was. This is the tricky part for everybody, is how much per hour. You have to really think about that. There's a couple ways to kind of approach that, and it's going to be a little bit varied for everybody. One way to think of it is, how much do you need to get paid per hour to make the living that you need to make, to pay your rent, to pay your groceries, to, keep yourself moving. If you have an income from another, job, it might be, how much do I need to make per hour to replace that? Another way of looking at it is, I tell people to think about, okay, if someone were doing this as a job, if you were hiring someone to do this, how much would you have to pay them per hour? And a lot of that type of information is available through the Department of Labor's website. They've got some good guidelines for different industries and what people get paid for different types of jobs, so you can look that up, or I can help you with that. And so that may be something to think about as well. Even if you're in the early stages of your business, and a lot of times people at the early stage say, I don't really need to be paid by this business yet, I just want to work to get it off the ground and I'll be paid later. It's still important to include that hourly wage here, mainly because if your business grows and you get to the point where you maybe need to outsource some of that, or you need to hire an employee to do it, you want to have that cost built in, whether it's you producing the item or it's somebody else. Even if you're not taking that draw from the business, you want to make sure that the price covers that production labor, because if it's not you, it's going to have to be somebody else, and you want to make sure that that's in there. And so once you've figured out, the total hours and hourly rate, and in this case, it was a shirt that had 6 appliques on it. Her labor was $80 for 6 hours, $13 an hour, so we added up the labor here. And we'll come over here to the next section. And this is overhead. And this is a little bit tricky. A lot of people struggle with this because, they think, okay, if I've got to pay my rent, how do I attribute, how much of my rent comes from each shirt that I sell? So it gets it's a little bit of educated guessing and finagling, but you can come up with something, roughly. So in this case, and I think this is something that would be useful for a lot of you. She did a lot of shows. She went to a lot of craft shows, a lot of trade shows, and she knew how much those were. She knew how much she spent every year on trade shows. And so what we did was factor in, okay, if that was averaged out for the year, how much would that be a month? And in her case, it's $208 a month. And so we put that amount in our tally. And then she figured her utilities, her insurance. And so then what we did was take a look at, okay, how many units do you produce and sell in an average month? Again, if you're in the early stages and if you're new to wholesaling, you're going to do some educated guessing here. You might base it on, how much can I just physically produce? There's only so many hours in the day. How many widgets can I make? It may be based on your past experience, but you want to try to find a way to say, okay, if I'm selling 100 of these items and this is what my total overhead is for the month, then each of those items needs to bring me that much money toward my total overhead. And then you'll have the total overhead per item here figured. So then we get to the pricing, and I think what happens is a lot of times people stop right here. They say, okay, I know how much my raw materials are, my labor, my overhead, I'll add that all in, and that's how much my price is. Actually, what that is your break-even price. What that means is that you've paid for the product, you've got it produced, and you've paid for your overhead, so you've kept the doors open, but the thing that they're missing is profit. So if you price at break-even, this is basically so that you know what you need to bring in at the very, very minimum to keep the business moving forward. You're not profitable, you're not going to have money left over, but you're also not losing money. So this is a good kind of measurement point for you to know. But on top of that, you need to make sure that you add profit. Now, again, this is something that can be, very different for every business and every business owner and every industry. But you want to think about, how much do I need to bring in from each item to be able to meet my goal for my personal salary, or to meet my goal for how much profit I want to have to reinvest in the business. And again, this could be a very, subjective type of thing. And again, we can help you out with this. Lauren can help you. We're here to kind of, brainstorm and bounce ideas off. But you want to know what that profit amount is. And then you add that, and that gives you your total price. And so, again, you can feel free when you get a copy of this, or if you're downloading it today, change these little categories up. I took out the calculations in each of these so you could add lines in if you want to. I'd be glad, if you're not really familiar with Excel, I'd be glad to input formulas for you so there's an automatic calculation there. But once you go through this, and there's a line up here where you can put in the item if you've got multiple items, and you can break down the pricing. Once you've gone through this type of exercise, it's really handy to keep in your files, because if you suddenly have a material that goes up in cost, you can go back to this worksheet and make that change and adjust your price accordingly, so that extra cost doesn't come out of your profit. You want it to come out of here, where, if ribbons are going to cost more, or buttons, or whatever the case may be, you want to make sure you're covering that in your pricing. So it's a good tool to have that you can use kind of on an ongoing basis. So you'll have access to that. The other item that we've got here is a pricing worksheet. I just gave them two different names. They're really both worksheets, but this one, so the previous one really covered, breaking down the price per item. This one is looking at, so it would kind of be the next step once you know what your costs are and what you want to charge. This is taking your product and then pricing it for wholesale and factoring in what those retail margins would be, so you can know, what retailers could potentially be charging for your product in their shop. This one is pre-calculated with formulas, so you can feel free to, plug things in here. And again, this is something that we can either meet, or, over the phone or via email. I can walk you through with your own personal products, but I'll just give you, kind of the example we have here. So we've got the manufacturing costs. Let's say I make hand lotion, and it costs me $7 to produce 1 container of hand lotion. I know that, that's all of the oils and the scents and all of the things that go into that, the bottle, the labeling, all the stickers that go on it, all of those things. And so my wholesale price is going to be $14, and there's a few different ways. The nice thing about this particular worksheet is there's a few different ways to kind of approach things. So you'll see here that the formula up here for that particular wholesale price just multiplies the manufacturing cost by 2. And so if I put in here $10, it'll calculate $20. So you can feel free to change that if you're doing a different pricing strategy, or if in your industry something different goes on. But in general, you want to think about doubling kind of as a good starting point to say, okay, this is maybe where my pricing should be. And see how that lines up, with your pricing breakdown. These 2 columns in red I'm not going to talk about. This would be if you're using a distributor. I'm going to skip right over that tonight, assuming that a lot of you are kind of in the beginning stages of wholesaling and are handling things yourself rather than with a distributor. We can talk about that later if you want to, if that becomes a scenario for you. So we'll skip over these red lines. So we've got $7 to make my bottle of lotion, and I'm going to sell it to my retailer for $14. That means my gross margin is $7. When I sell it to the retailer, they're going to pay me $14, and my gross profit margin, the amount of profit that comes from that 1 bottle of lotion, is $7. So here in this section is where we start looking at what's going to happen to that product after the retailer buys it and puts it on their shelf. And this is the part that's probably going to be new to a lot of you and that you really want to pay attention to. And so, again, some of this stuff is going to go, a little bit more toward what industry you're in or the type of product that you have. But I've got some different calculations here if there's a 20% retail margin, a 30% retail margin, or 50%. This is probably the most common. These sections right here, 50% profit margin. That's keystone pricing, which is pretty typical, which basically means that the retailer is going to take your product and just double what they've paid for it. So if a retailer paid $14 for that bottle of lotion, when it lands on their shelves, they're going to put a price sticker on it that says $28. There are some other calculations here, and again, you can feel free to change the formulas or meet with me and I can help you change them if you're getting feedback, you know, or if you know in your industry there's a different profit margin, but we'll just look at this one to start with. So in this particular chart are all the pieces of pricing between you as a producer and the retailer at the end consumer. And I put this little guide down here so you can kind of see how the pieces break down. And also because what I find is a lot of these words, when they're being thrown around, especially at a show where you're very busy, kind of get a little confusing. So you want to take a look at, you know, if a retailer comes to you and says, well, you know, what would be the gross profit that I would make from this product? What they're asking for is, what is the retail sales price? So what are the price that they're selling their product for minus the wholesale, which is what they would be paying you for it. So actually this example takes the 20% margin. So the retail sales price is $17.50, you'll see right here, and they paid $14 for it. So that means that their gross profit, the retailer's gross profit, is $3.50. So you can see why this 50% margin is going to be a little more attractive to a retailer. I don't know a lot of retailers that don't make $3.50 off a you know, $17 bottle of hand lotion. Then sometimes they may express it as a percentage. I need to make, you know, X percentage, 20%, 40%, 30%, whatever it is. And so really what they're saying there is their gross profit in dollars divided by the retail sale price. So we just figured out here that their gross profit is $3.50. And if we divide that by the retail sale price, which in this case, you know, the example we're using is $17.50. So we take that $3.50 divided by $17.50, that gives them a 20% profit margin. So if a retailer says to you, I need to make a 20% profit margin when I bring this into my store, you can use this calculation to see if your pricing lines up and if that you're making enough money as well. Markup percentage is something I think a lot of people get profit margin and markup percentage. Profit margin is the money that's left over after the retailer has paid for the goods, after they've paid you for the inventory. How much do they get when someone buys it? The markup percentage is how much they mark it up from the price that they've paid you. What's the percentage? And so if we take that $17.50 again with the 20% profit margin and we divide it by the $14 that they paid for it, that gives us a markup of 1.25, 125% basically. So you might see people that say, I need a 200% markup. That's your keystone pricing. That's taking the $14 bottle of lotion that they've paid and doubling it for $28. And then the retail sales price, which is, you know, figured up here, is the wholesale cost times that markup percentage. So if we take the wholesale cost, wholesale price, which is 14, and we multiply it by 1.25, we'll come up with $17.50. So it's just a way to kind of help you figure the interchange of all of those terms that you might use. And again, you know, kind of plugging in some different scenarios. You can do it by product line. You know, you can put in a specific product here. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can use this sheet. So again, I'm probably dumping a whole lot of information on you right now. Don't let it overwhelm you. If this is something you want to, you know, look into a little more closely, certainly let me know, and we can help you out. That's what we're here for. So just going to do a quick check and see if we've got any questions floating in, and it doesn't look like it. I don't see any here, so I think we're okay. So we'll continue on. So that's pricing. Again, just a real quick and dirty cover of it. You know, if you've really got questions about your pricing, you know, definitely see somebody at the SBDC, talk with Lauren, you know, one or both, and we can help you delve into that a little bit more, because again, it's going to be different for each one of you. Some other things to think about when you're getting ready, you know, for the wholesale show and thinking about your pricing is, you know, what price is the market going to support? So thinking about what are people going to be willing to pay for this product on the shelf. And again, that comes down to, you know, that market research, knowing who the end customer is, who your competitors are, what are other similar products selling for, and just really being familiar with what's out there in the market. Looking at not just retail stores, not just brick and mortar stores, but, you know, what are things selling for online? What are they selling for at retail shows? So it's important whenever you're doing shows, whether they're wholesale or retail, if you get a chance to look at the other people that are there and see how pricing compares to what you're doing, so that you're familiar with that. Also thinking about how your price projects image. And I think, again, this kind of goes back to a lot of times as a producer or as a cottage industry, you really love what you do, your heart and soul is in it, but you don't always value it in terms of dollars. So I think something that happens a lot is that you tend to not want to overprice your product and instead end up underpricing it. And you know, the idea, I think, in those scenarios is if I, you know, don't charge too much, a lot of people will buy my product. But also think about, you know, the consumer mind relates quality to price. So if they see something, even if it's very high quality, if the price is low, they're going to tend to think that, well, maybe it's not, you know, as great quality as I want, or maybe there's something that's not up to snuff with it. As opposed to, you know, a price that's a little higher, that really reflects what the quality is. So again, thinking about how, you know, that pricing reflects your image. And then also, again, you know, like I talked about before, knowing what those retailers' needs are. How much do they need to make? And they'll let you know that. Most of them will be familiar with that, and they'll be able to let you know, so that you can make sure that you've got that built into your pricing. Lauren also kind of threw another little tidbit out there, which is, I think, really good. And it's thinking about, excuse me, not selling your products direct to consumer, like at a craft fair or, you know, some kind of market, for less than your retailers can sell them for. Because if customers are coming into the store and saying, oh, I bought that, you know, at that craft show, or I bought that at the farmer's market for 20% less, you know, they're not going to come to the retail store and buy it. If your retail store owners notice that that's happening, even if customers aren't saying anything to them, they're probably not going to be real happy, because you're trying not to compete with yourself, basically. You don't want your product sold at your own retail for less than what a store is going to buy them. So make sure that you're cognizant of that. And I always think it's tricky. Some people think, well, you know, if I'm selling in a shop in Lake Placid, should I be selling more than if I was selling it here in Canton? It's a really tricky thing to get into, because you never know where people are going to see your products. And if they start realizing there's a huge price difference between one venue and another, I don't think it's going to settle really well with retailers, but then also sometimes with your customers. So be careful of that. A good practice is to just say, this is what my price is, and sell it at that price, whether it's wholesale or retail, and stick to that. And for one thing, it'll make your life a heck of a lot easier, because you won't have to remember, well, you know, is this marked at this price or that price? But also, I think it gives that consistency in the market that's really important. So the other thing that you really have to think about when you're getting into wholesaling is kind of, you know, how are you going to manage this? Because, you know, you're probably familiar with record keeping from all of your retail operations. There are some other things that you want to do with wholesale to kind of help keep things on track, and to, you know, kind of just keep that relationship and information flowing between you and the retailer, because now you've got another person involved in this relationship, and there's going to have to be some back and forth here. So what you want to do is set up your wholesale terms and policies. Think about how you're going to handle different situations and have a policy written up for that that you can provide your retailers, and that you know when you're talking to them how you're going to handle different situations. So one of those things may be a minimum order. You don't always have to do that. It depends, on your product and your price point, but that's something that you may want to think about when someone orders from you, requiring them to order a certain dollar amount. Sometimes that's important to do because it kind of helps you to make sure that there's enough in the store for someone to display. So, like for instance, I got this jar of honey sitting on my desk right now. It's little, maybe I don't know how many ounces it is, but one of those small little like gift-sized jars of honey. And if I'm making that honey and I'm selling it wholesale, when a retailer comes and says, I want to buy 5 of those, I have this, 1,000-square-foot store and I want to buy 5 of those. If they take those little jars of honey and put that on the shelf somewhere in their store, it's going to get lost. So you want to make sure that, whatever sales go out from your wholesale booth are going to be represented properly. So that may be a case where you might want to say, here's kind of a starter set of some different sizes or some different, different flavors or different, combinations or whatever, so that they've got a full display. So it makes sure that there's an effective display there. It also discourages people from coming in and just ordering one of something to kind of try it out. You can provide samples to people. That's certainly acceptable. And it's much more efficient than having someone come and buy, 1 or 2 little things. And again, remember that the whole purpose of wholesaling is to have larger volume and more sales because your profit margin is small. So if you're selling one item here and there, you're not hitting that goal. Some people will do is set a minimum order for the first order, and then maybe have a different minimum for orders after that, or maybe not have a minimum for orders after that. But maybe doing that as a way to get established in a retail store. So again, these decisions kind of go back to market research and knowing, the retailers, knowing the market that you're going to be in, and knowing what's going to work when it gets in front of that end customer. You're going to certainly want to think about how you're going to get paid. And so this is a little bit different than when you're selling at retail, because if you're selling at a show or at a market, at a farmer's market, or if you're selling online, people pay for the product and they walk away. You've got your money. With wholesale, that's not always the case. It's important to require that payment is received before you ship your order. And so you may not necessarily require everyone to pay at the wholesale show, but when you produce the product and you get ready to ship it, you want to make sure that that payment goes through. So you may be taking their credit card information or a check or something at the show before you ship it. Notify them, and we're all familiar with that process in buying as consumers. We're ready to ship, we're sending your payment through, and then shipment will come. So that's acceptable. But you want to also be clear about what kinds of payment terms are accepted. Are you going to bill them and accept a check? Will you accept credit cards only? Will you accept either? But especially on the first order, make sure that you get paid. And we're going to talk about some other things that you can do to do that as well. But, I think what happens sometimes is the first wholesale order comes in and you get really excited because you're like, yeah, they ordered 100 of these. I'm so excited. And so you just ship them out, and then you might get stuck not getting paid. So you always want to get paid before that order ships. If you want, after that first order, if you want to provide people net 30 terms, which just means we'll ship it to you and then you have 30 days to pay for that, that's perfectly fine. Go right ahead and do that. But what you want to do is make sure that you do a credit check before you do that, because if someone does not have good credit, vendor credit or business credit established, you don't want to take that risk. You can certainly ask them for references. You want to make sure that your likelihood of getting that payment, is increasing. Again, you don't have to do this. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can, always say that the payment comes before things are shipped, and then you never have to worry about it. So, just be thinking about what you're comfortable with, and again, what's customary in your industry and for your type of product. And so some other things to think about in your terms and policies is shipping. How are you going to handle that? Are you going to charge a flat rate? Is it going to be charged by weight? So obviously that's going to depend on what your product is. If it's something that varies, if your products are a standard size and a standard weight, then you can set a flat rate. Who are you going to use for shipping? Are you going to use UPS or FedEx or the Postal Service? Do you have one preferred source, or can the customer choose? Again, this is going to depend on where your retailers are located, what's customary in your industry. There are certain areas where certain types of shipping are much more efficient and effective than in others. So if you find in a certain geographic area that all your retailers are saying, boy, I really wish you'd use UPS because our FedEx service isn't great, or vice versa, or they may say, it's really hard for us to get to the post office if they're in a rural area, and you want to be thinking about those things. Think about your policies for returns. Will you take returns on products if they don't sell? I would encourage you to not do that. Make it the retailer's responsibility to sell those products, and if they have to mark it down, that's just the nature of the beast. But also think about what terms. Would you take a return because of the condition of a product, if it was damaged, or if something happened to it, and within what time frame? Do you want a retailer to come back to you a year later and say, hey, I've got this product that you gave me and it's kind of faded now, I want my money back? You probably want to set some parameters on that. And how will you handle damage? If the product is shipped to the customer and it gets damaged en route, how is that going to be handled? Are you going to reimburse? Are you going to provide them replacement product? If you have something that is prone to damage or is breakable, practice with your shipping. Send some stuff out to friends and family to see how it arrives and what the best shipping methods are going to be, so that it can be, you can be sure it's arriving undamaged. And also thinking about, how much those extra costs are going to add to what you're doing as well. Other things to be considered in your policy are, how will you handle order cancellations? Can people cancel an order within a certain period of time? If it takes you 6 months to produce a product for a retailer, can they cancel after 3 months? Or at what point are you going to basically get stuck with that product and making sure that cancellation after that point either isn't allowed, or that maybe they have to pay a certain percentage of the cost or something. If you have a display policy, or there's certain things that have to be done to your product to display it, again, keep things simple for the retailer, so don't add a lot of burden on them here. But maybe if you provide branding, signage, specific shelving, or specific display materials or display cases, maybe you would want those always displayed in that fashion. You could set minimum retail pricing if you want to. I don't know how important that is for most of you, but basically that would just kind of protect you from someone going out there and charging rock bottom price. I don't think you're going to find that, especially at this show, because you're looking at people who are really kind of in the same boat that you are. They want their businesses to succeed. They want to sell a quality product to their customers, so they're not looking to slash prices a whole lot and be a big discount dealer. And then also thinking about, are you going to offer discounts to people for certain volumes of sales? If they order a certain number of product, will they get a little bit of a discount or something like that? And again, those aren't things that you have to do, but just things to be thinking about, and if you want to provide them. Some other management tools that you're going to want to have, you're going to want to have an order form that people can fill out, especially when you're at the show. Make sure that you assign an order number or a purchase number to each order. And that'll be important. I'll show you in a minute an example of that, because you might get 5 orders from one retailer over the course of a year, And if they call with a question about one of those orders, you want to be able to access which one it is. And if you've got 5 of them in front of you, you can say to them, well, which purchase order number is it? They can give you the number and you can go right to the information. So it just kind of helps to streamline things. Make sure, obviously, that you get the buyer's name and their contact information, address, phone number, email, all of those things, and their shipping and billing address, which could be different. So, make sure that you clarify that. If their billing address is different from where the products get shipped to, make sure that that's clarified on your form so that you get all the information. Their payment information, excuse me. So, if you're collecting credit card information, you're going to want to make sure that you're keeping it secure. And I could do a whole other session on that. We can talk about that. I can get you some information about how to do that. Or if they're, what their payment terms are, how they're going to be, keeping that information and getting it to you. On the order form, you would want the shipping date, projected shipping date, if there's, any give or take there. And make sure you have duplicate copies. You want to give the customer one, and you want to have one yourself, obviously. You can get those things printed up ahead of time if you want. You can order duplicates from a printer, or you can just get a template off Excel or Word, and just use some of that carbon paper in between. Whatever works best for you. It doesn't have to be really complicated or difficult. And so let me just pull up the sample invoice here somewhere. Or I'm sorry, the sample order. So here's a sample order sheet. This is just one that I pulled off from Word, I believe, if I remember right. And you can take something like this, save it, and customize it. Where you put your logo here, information about your company, the date, the order number. Also include here an invoice number. You can leave this blank until you send an invoice to the customer, and then write that invoice number in. Again, that gives you a tracking point. So you've got your sales order, and then when you invoice the customer, the order number will be on that, so you can cross-track them. Your company information will be on here. Obviously, it's important for them to be able to contact you, who the order is going to. And again, shipping information, if it's different, would go here. If you have sales reps, you can put who the salesperson is. Shipping method, shipping term, shipment date, when the payment is. This says due on receipt. You could put due, before shipping, whatever your policy is going to be. Quantity, item number, description. A lot of this is pretty self-explanatory. The unit price per item. If you're going to provide any kind of discount, some people will provide a discount for orders placed at a show, or if you're going to do a discount for a certain volume, that would go here. You tally it up. Sales tax won't be an issue because you're selling wholesale, so you won't be charging sales tax. And then you've got a copy of the order, and so does the customer. And then the other thing you're going to want is the invoice. So the order form is, what is the person going to buy, and then the invoice is how are they going to pay for it. This gets, provided to them at the point in time when you've got the order ready and you're sending it to them. And so again, just like with the order form, create your own. Make sure that it's labeled as an invoice. Sometimes people will take the order form and just make a copy of that with the total in the bottom. If you don't label it as an invoice, they may not recognize that they need to pay it, believe it or not. Include your contact information and spell out your payment terms. All of those things will be on there. We've got a sample here. Right here. So if someone comes to the wholesale show and they place an order, you fill this little form out with them, you take that back to the shop, you fill their order, and you're getting ready to ship it. If they're not paying before shipment, so the ideal thing is you take that payment information at the show, their credit card information or whatever the case may be. If that's not the case and you're sending this to them and waiting for payment, you would send this invoice. And so whoever it's billed to, this would be the customer. There's customer ID here. You could change that to order number, when the payment is due, what the terms are, when the delivery date is, how it's being shipped, all of these things. And this will be basically, what's being shipped in the shipment. how many of each thing. Maybe they ordered 10 of a specific t-shirt, but you're only shipping 5 right now, so that would go on here. And then the total for what their order is shipped. Again, sales tax won't be an issue for you, so you don't include that. And then that will go with their order. An important thing to remember is to, you can include this with the packing, but also include a copy that's separate from, so if you box up all of your, hand lotions, somebody ordered 20 of them and you box them all up, make sure that this invoice gets shipped separately, because a lot of things can happen in a retail setting. That box will come off the truck in the back room, and an employee might go open it and go, oh, look at this cool stuff that we got, and take it right out on the shelves, and might throw away the invoice with the box. If the owner's not there, or sometimes the owner might just, miss it as well. So if you send that invoice separately under separate cover in a separate envelope, it's more likely to get noticed, and you're more likely to get paid more quickly. So some other things to think about that you're going to want to have to kind of make that sales process go a little more smoothly is a catalog and some line sheets, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes. And yeah, where is the line sheet information? I have that here somewhere. I do have that. So just don't let me forget to talk about it. So everybody knows what a catalog is. We've seen them. They can be, a lot of different formats. A catalog is typically more detailed than what a line sheet would be. And so I'll show you some examples. Basically, the line sheet is kind of an abbreviated catalog, and then the catalog is something that they may be taking away from the show so that they can place orders for you, with you later on. So let me pull up those examples for you so you can see the differences. So I've got a few examples here, and again, you're going to have access to these documents to get a good look at them later as well. But this is some sample line sheets, and you'll see here it's just a very, very basic representation of the products that are available. And so for this one, you've got the period here, fall 2013, the name of the company. Some of the wholesale terms are on here. That's good to have on there. All of this contact information, very important, because if they're taking this away from the show, you want it to be easy for them to contact you. And so basically, just a picture of each item. You can see the pictures are very clear. It's easy to see, what the design looks like, what the colors are, the placement of the logos and things like that. You want to assign your things on the line sheet item number, so you'll see each one here has an item number. This one's F13 WDEST, F13 WUNC. Looking at the names, you may give each of your products a different name. Some very basic information here: organic cotton, natural dyes, the colors that it comes in, the sizes that it comes in. But you can see that this is very concise and very to the point, so that someone can easily access this later on. Here's one that's a little bit more detailed for a specific type of clothing. This one's from Nordstrom, so it's a little bit more elaborate than probably what you'll be dealing with, but it just shows you a different format. So there's a sketch of the product, and then some other things that represent the color scheme. And again, with the basic description, not a lot of detail or not a lot of elaboration here, but just the important details. This one's nice. Again, very clear pictures, very easy to see what the product looks like, good descriptions, contact information, your basic terms for payment and orders. So all of the pertinent information is all on one sheet, easy to access. And you're not limited necessarily to one sheet, but you do want to keep it brief. You don't want to be handing them a ream of paper. Here's one for some jewelry. Again, same thing. Good quality pictures, basic information here, contact information. This one doesn't have wholesale pricing or terms included, so you can have that on a separate sheet perhaps. Another, different type of product, but again, the same type of information. Here's our pricing. This is what our products look like. Some good pictures, some pictures of the different labels with all the pertinent information, terms of sale here. So everything that they need. Another similar one, this one actually has UPC codes on it. So if you have a product that you've got UPC codes for, that may be handy to have here. Again, basic information on pricing. So what I find is that if you have line sheets, they kind of make a nice complement to your catalog because, getting stuff like this printed up can be pretty expensive, especially some of these nice color things that you see. And we'll be looking at some catalog samples in a minute that you'll see will be really expensive to get printed. So if you invest money in getting catalogs printed, then you may want to use your line sheets to convey pricing so that someone can take a look at the catalog and then refer to a line sheet to find what the price is. And that way, if you change prices, you're only reprinting the line sheets and not that full catalog. So again, the catalog obviously has much more detail than the line sheet. Again, don't include the prices just because printing costs are so high. And you can also use the same catalog for wholesale and retail if you're using your catalog for retail as well. One thing that I found too is a lot of people are now putting their catalogs just on their website rather than printing. And so that's something that you can do. I think people are very comfortable with that now, so you can give people a link or maybe create a QR code that they could access the online catalog or through your website, however you decide to do it. So that's also another viable solution as well. The other thing you're going to want to make sure you have is a business card, and it seems like a no-brainer, but a lot of people do forget it. Make sure it looks professional, well-designed, consistent with your branding, and again, all of the things that we're talking about, the line sheets, your order forms, your invoice forms, the catalog, your card, all of those things should have consistent branding. And that will go into the next section. We talk about the design of your booth, but there should be a consistent look and feel with all of this stuff. And I could do a whole other session on branding, but you want to make sure that all of these things reflect what you want people to think of your business, the flavor that you want them to get, or the feel that you want them to have for what you do. So make sure that those things are as consistent as possible. Another thing with business cards is make sure they're standard size. I've had some people that have business cards that are a little off on size because they think it's kind of cool, it stands out. But for people at shows, if they're collecting a pile of cards at one show that's a little off size, can really kind of be a pain in the keister. So keep that in mind. There's a few links here to some wholesale catalogs. I'll just click on a couple of them because they take a little while to load. You can kind of go and look at them in a little more detail. Later on, like I said, you're going to get access to this this slideshow, so you'll be able to get them. And so this is a catalog for a linen company, and obviously this is an online version of it, but you get a good visual for what the printed copy would look like. So very nice, colorful cover. Excellent photography, really great looking stuff. I would say whenever you're able to invest in professional photography and professional design for things like this, it's certainly worth the money. There's close-ups here, especially with textiles. I mean, if you look at all of the close-ups here and the different designs, you really get a good feel for the type of product this business is selling. The items are easily accessible and numbered. So you can see the first few pages here, kind of like nice, general branding, aesthetic stuff. And then the nuts and bolts are here. Here's all the different colors, what the different prices are. So, a lot of really good detail there and good imaging. And I think, which one do I want to do? Try this one. So again, Photography is very important with the catalog, whether it's online or it's in print. You can see here a very consistent look, but you get a really good feel for being able to see each specific design. You know, it's just, you know, almost as good as seeing the actual thing. So all of that type of detail, you see there's easy reference for the pricing. So these are the kinds of things that you want to maybe have developed, maybe not necessarily for your first show, but things to be thinking about in the future, or even, like I said, to develop them online will be a little less expensive that you can refer people to. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. Anybody have any questions so far? I'm going to talk about kind of preparing for the show and getting ready for your booth, and this is kind of the fun stuff, I think. Okay, looks like we're still no questions, which is fine. So we want to think about the things you want to do before the show and the things you want to do, you know, while you're at the show to be able to kind of, you know, put your best foot forward, basically. So the key with any show, whether it's wholesale or retail, is to know as much as you can before you go. So know, what kind of show is this? Is it the kind of show where, you know, retailers are going to expect to place orders? Do they want cash and carry? Do they want to be able to come in and buy the product and leave? I think Lauren's always told me in the past that the buyer day shows tend to be a combination of both. So you want to be prepared for that. You want to find out, and Lauren just confirmed that is still true. You want to find out, and again, Lauren will be providing this to you, I'm sure. You know, how much booth space do you have? What's included with that booth? Do you get a table and chairs? Do you get a tablecloth? Will there be pipe and drape? You know, will there be hard walls provided? Is there lighting, electricity? You know, do you need internet access? Will that be provided? All of those things ahead of time so you can plan as much as possible. Also knowing, you know, when can you set up? How much time do you have to get your booth you know, built and set up, and then when do you tear down? You know, most shows obviously don't like you to tear down before the show ends because it kind of becomes a waterfall. You know, you really want the full show there for the full time. And you'd be surprised, even though it seems to slow down at the end, you might pick up some extra sales that last little stretch of the show where it seems like not much is going on. So it's a good idea to kind of take full advantage of the opportunity. Thinking about things that you'll want to bring. Certainly you'll want to have product samples, at least one from each of the lines that you're selling. You know, if it's a show like the buyer days where there's cash and carry, you'll want to make sure that you've got some inventory for people to purchase as well so they can buy and take it with them. You'll want to have some wholesale packets made up ahead of time, which might include your catalog, your line sheets, and order forms. So if someone comes and says, oh, I love ABC product that you've got here, you can hand them the packet. Maybe it's in a nice folder, or maybe they're just clipped together, but you can hand them everything all at once and say, you know, here's our pricing sheet, our catalog, here's the order form, I can help you fill it out, or if you want to do it yourself. Having some clipboards handy is nice so that, you know, whatever you can do to get people to place orders right then and there, if they can, you know, you've got pens and a clipboard, they can fill it right out. Somewhere you'll want to have a way to collect information, email addresses for your bulk email list. So you may have it on your order form somewhere. You may have just a sign-up sheet, or you may collect business cards. You know, let people know that it's for an email list and that you'll be sending, you know, notices about sales or new products or whatever, so that you know that they're agreeing to getting emails. But collect that contact information, because as much as the wholesale show is a place for you to make sales, it's also a place for you to make contacts. And so, you know, you never know who's going to be coming by your booth who may be interested in what you have, but maybe just it doesn't fit with them right now, or you know, maybe they just don't have a budget for more inventory at this point, but they will in 6 months. So you want to make sure that those contacts, you know, are part of your collection that day as well. It's a good idea to think about just miscellaneous things that might be handy, like little tools and office supplies, you know, for things that could possibly go wrong, you know, pins, safety pins, stray pins, maybe a hammer, you know, if there's, you know, if you've got some displays that need assembly, screwdrivers, tape, you know, pens and paper, maybe some cleaning supplies, depending on the show venue and who's doing the setup. I've gone to some shows where I've gotten there and the tables were filthy and you had to clean them off before you could set up, which I'm sure isn't the case for Lauren's show because I know she pays attention to that. But you know, any of those little things that you could think of that you might encounter that you could need. You just have a little kit put together that has kind of all those little items in it. And then the things that you're going to use to design your booth, which we're going to talk about a little bit more too. So maybe special tablecloths or display fixtures, signage, all of that stuff. If you're doing, you know, multiple shows, if you do it several times a year, it's a good idea to have a packing list so that you can kind of remember every time you do a show, here are all the things that I need. You can check them off and you won't forget anything. I work with some people who kind of have their show, you know, packages kind of put together. They've got some of those plastic tote bins where they've got everything for the show in it. They make a list when they leave the show of things that they need to replenish, and it all goes back in that bin. And so whenever they get ready to do a show, they just pick the bins up and walk out the door. However you organize it, but you know, have some kind of checkpoint for yourself. You know, again, because it gets busy at the show, you may forget, oh, I ran out of pens. You know, little things like that that can make your life a little bit easier. Before the show, also thinking about, you know, preparing for your sales and marketing. So like I talked about before, research the buyers who are attending. When you get that list from Lauren, you know, look at their websites, visit some stores if it's possible, or even, you know, between now and if you do the show in the spring, you know, being able to do those store visits. They don't have to necessarily be before the show in September. You may want to do a pre-show email or send a mailer to buyers if you have access to their contact information, just to let them know, hey, be sure to stop by. You know, this is what we'll have. You may want to create some specials for the show if you want to, you know, really encourage the cash and carry sales. Say, hey, we've got a special cash and carry 10% off today, or, you know, whatever the case may be. If you're looking more for wanting to get orders, maybe, you know, have a special that entices that. If you place an order for 50 items, we'll give you 5 free, or, you know, something like that. For any show, whether it's wholesale or retail or just a business expo, it's always good to have a practice on your elevator speech. I don't know if you all know what an elevator speech is, but basically it's just a very short statement that you can kind of give consistently that explains to people what you do, you know, what your goals are, says something about your product. And so if you think about, you know, some of the companies that you're very familiar with, their branding, they have a tagline or, you know, a way they present themselves is pretty consistent. You want to make sure that you have that. And again, not, you know, the idea of an elevator pitch is, you know, thinking about if you're getting on an elevator and someone else steps onto the elevator with you, and, you know, they say, you know, what do you do or what do you sell? You have to be able to explain that to them from the time it takes you to close the elevator doors and get to the next floor. You've got one floor to explain that. So you basically want to make sure that you can give something that's really concise and accurate so that people understand what you do. You know, and I think we've all been in a situation where we've listened to someone try to explain what they do for 25 minutes, and when they get done, you're still not quite sure. You want to be much more concise and accurate than that. Another thing to kind of be familiar with and to think about and define for yourself so that you can convey it to, you know, customers and retailers who are at the show is what your key selling points are. What are the features and benefits of my product? You know, features are typically the physical descriptive elements of your product. So, you know, what kind of material is used? Is it 100% cotton? Is it a blend? You know, what kind of wood is used for this carving? Those kinds of things. The benefits are, you know, kind of the less tangible things. You know, how is this a benefit to the customer? So in the case of a retail show, you know, how is this going to benefit your shop? It's going to fit in well with your inventory. It's going to be, you know, complementary to some of the other things. If you have a small retail shop that maybe sells a nice collection of, you know, local cheese, and you sell cutting boards, wouldn't this be a great way for you to display, you know, your local cheese? And when someone comes in and buys some cheese as a gift, they're going to also want to buy this beautiful cutting board to go with it. So thinking about what benefits can you offer that retailer that's going to make them say, yes, I need to have that product in my store. So we'll talk about booth design a little bit. Just some very basic and, not hard and fast rules, but things to keep in mind. One thing to think about is the 2-foot rule. And so remembering to keep the most interesting items that you have, the things that are most colorful or most eye-catching, within 2 feet of the aisle. So you want to make sure that when people are passing by, if you think about the flow of a typical show, people are kind of walking in a straight line with a booth on one or both sides of them. Not always noticing things that are in the back of the booth first, but the things that are closest to the aisle. So you want to make sure that you've got something eye-catching that's really close to where people are going to be passing by. Again, think about branding, having consistency in how your booth appears and how your products look. So, an extreme example would be, if I have like rustic wooden furniture, I don't want to display that in a booth that's like, really modern with bright colors. It just doesn't match. You would want something that's kind of rustic and relaxed looking. Make sure that your brand is reflected in your logo, the colors that you select for your booth, your display materials, your signage, just trying to be very consistent, and even maybe thinking about how you dress for the show, that it reflects your branding and what your company is about, and what your products are about. If there's a way for you to do some kind of demonstration with your product, that's fabulous. I know that not all products lend themselves to that, but also be thinking about not always a physical demonstration, but you may have, thinking along the lines of like show, don't tell. So you may have maybe a video or a photo collage that's running through on a screen in your booth where people can see your process of how you make the product. You might have some samples or color swatches, anything that can give people a tangible idea of your products beyond just what they're seeing there. And it's also important to try to showcase your products as a retailer might use them in their store. So they can walk by and say, oh, I could do that in my store. I see that that particular type of display would fit in my window or on my shelf or wherever. You also want to have good communication in your booth. And I'm not talking just necessarily verbal, but being clear about pricing, the materials that you use or ingredients. Have all of that type of information on your tags, on your signage, on your packaging, because when retailers come to this show, they're getting exposed to a lot of products in a relatively short amount of time, and they may talk to you, and when they leave at the end of the day and they get back to their shop, they might say, oh boy, I remember that person that made those really great handbags, and I just can't remember what she told me she used for material or whatever. If that stuff is on your packaging, they don't have to guess. They can look at it and say, oh yeah, I remember we talked about that. You'll want to think about having good lighting, especially if you've got small items or if you've got items that maybe are kind of metallic or shiny, making sure that you've got some lighting that will catch that and kind of, catch the eye of people. If you have enough room and if it's appropriate for your business, you want to make sure you may want to make sure that you've got some space that you can sit with potential buyers. This might come down to staffing as well. If you've got someone there with you, you might just have a couple of chairs kind of off to the side or in the back of the booth where you can sit down with somebody and go through an order sheet, or a space on your table where a buyer could, kind of put down their clipboard and fill out their order form. So be thinking about, how is it going to be easy for people to get me those orders. Try to have some space where you store your personal stuff or your extra inventory or your extra catalogs and all of those things. I've been to shows where I see booths where there's boxes piled up in the back of the booth, and you really don't want that. If they get shoved under the table behind a tablecloth, or even if you've got to, tote them out to your car and replenish frequently if that's possible. Again, it helps to have another set of hands with you if you can do that. But just again, keeping a clean line in your booth and making sure that people aren't getting distracted by all of the extra, visual things. And so I've got a few pictures of some of these different ideas. Some of these pictures are going to be from shows that are much, much different than what you're going to see at Buyer Days, so I'm just kind of demonstrating the idea here, not necessarily thinking that these layouts will necessarily work at Buyer Days, but to give you a general idea. And so this booth, you can see, You know, they've got some interesting stuff in the background, but there's a table right out here by the front where people are walking by. There's no way they're going to miss that. If that table wasn't there in the front, they may just walk by and not see the stuff in the back, but they've got something right here that catches their eye. Same thing with this booth. You can see there's a lot in the back. You know, looks like there's some, you know, custom design, you know, aprons, apparel, and stuff here. But right up front, there's some interesting woodworking, some artwork, some stuff that's going to catch the eye as people go by. I think this picture, it gives a really good idea of good branding. If you look at this picture, you know, there's nothing here that really tells you exactly what's being sold, but by looking at the decor and the images and the color scheme, you can probably make a guess. It's probably something related to agriculture. It might be cheese, it might be milk, heck, it might be cows. We don't really know. But, you know, I don't see someone here selling, you know, sterling silver jewelry or, you know, something along those lines. It's something here that's rustic, that's, you know, somehow related to country, rural, farming, agriculture. So there's good branding here to give you an idea of what the atmosphere is. Another real good example of branding, if you look at these two pictures, you know, both of these booths are selling jewelry. But if you look at the picture on the right, your expectation of the type of jewelry that's there is going to be much different than what's on the left. And so on the left here, you can see there's kind of some antique decor, you know, the hanging cloth, a little bit, you know, rustic, kind of gypsy-ish looking, very kind of natural, easygoing, laid back. So you'd expect to find maybe some unique stuff here with different colored stones, maybe some antiqued metals. Whereas in this booth, even if that jewelry wasn't on display here, you would expect to come here and find things that are, you know, very clean lines. It looks like a lot of it is silver, you know, very simple design, but high impact. So, you know, it gives you an idea of, you know, the branding and the atmosphere of the booth. Even if you take the product out, you can kind of have that expectation of what might be sold there, and that's really what you're going for. These are some examples of demonstrating. Obviously, if you have a food product, you know, it's easy to demonstrate. You can show how it's made, or you can give samples. You know, I love this example of, you know, obviously none of you are going to have this much space, but, you know, DeWalt is at a trade show and having the power tools there that people can actually try out. You know, I don't know that all of you will be able to do something like that, but, you know, ways that you can show people anything that you do. Again, ways to demonstrate. This will show a retailer how the product can be displayed. If I'm coming to this booth and I'm looking at these scarves and I go, gee, I just don't know where I would put them, and I turn around and I look at this and I go, hey, I've got a rack like that in my store. I could display the scarves like that. Or, oh, I have a mannequin just like that in my store. I could, you know, put that wrap right around it, and that's what it would look like. A retailer can really see how that would transfer to their space. The same thing with this this image here on the right. You know, these little food flavorings that are being sold here. And you've got a nice little display rack, so it's a very clean, neat display, very clear what's being sold. This will stand out on a retailer's shelf. If someone came and just bought 4 or 5 of these particular items and put them on a shelf with everything else, it would get lost. But there's branding here. It kind of is a cohesive look to the product. A retailer can say, I can take that and I can put it right on my shelf, and it basically is advertising itself. Very simple and easy for the retailer to deal with. Good communication, again, very good signage here, tells you what the prices are, points to where those things are. You know, it's very easy to know what the pricing is. So again, remembering that if you're at a busy show, you might have 3 or 4 people at your booth, but you can really only talk to one at a time. So if you're talking to one person and you've got a couple other people there, you want to make sure that they have access to information, even if they're not able to talk to you quite yet, that they can look at what's here and know what the pricing is and get as much information as they can before they have a chance to talk to you. These are a couple examples of sales consultation areas, and again, I think these booths are probably a little atypical of what you're going to see at buyer days, but just some ideas to kick around. The one over here on the left, I'm not really wild about space-wise. It's a little overcrowded and distracting, but the idea is that, you know, there's just table there where, you know, a buyer and a seller could potentially sit down and have a conversation. The one here on the right is a little nicer because you can see that consultation area is a little bit off to the side, so people can still come into the booth and take a look at what's going on where, you know, someone could be doing sales with a person over here. Just some tips for when you're designing your booth to keep in mind. You know, plan your booth layout ahead of time. You know, I tell people to practice at home, have a table or, you know, a couple of tables that you put together that are going to be about the right size, know your space, and play with it. You know, get some different things, some different designs, use different lighting and see how it works. You might want to have some different alternatives depending on how things look when you get to the venue. If you do a layout that you really love, write it down, do a sketch of it, or take a picture of it so you remember it when you get to the venue. Something just kind of handy to keep in mind, keep things portable and lightweight. You know, if you've got, you know, this really beautiful display shelf, but it weighs, you know, 80 pounds, are you going to want to lug that in and out of the show? Is it going to be cumbersome? You know, it may not be worth the hassle, so be thinking of things that are easy to transport and move around. Again, plan according to the amount of time you have allowed to set up. So again, that practice is important when you get your booth designed, and, you know, think about, is this something that I can do within the allotted time? Because you really don't want retailers coming in and your booth only half set up or you're still working on it. Once they come in the door, you want to be able to concentrate fully on them. Plan for what you're going to wear. You know, be neat and professional, but be in keeping with your branding. Think about comfort as well. You know, you're probably going to be on your feet a lot of the day, so making sure that you've got comfortable shoes. You know, things like having, you know, dressing in layers. If it's going to be warm or if it's going to be cold, you want to be able to accommodate that, you know, whichever way it goes. I'm just doing a quick pause here and check. It doesn't look like we've got any questions so far, so we'll kind of get to the little tail end of where we are here. So once you're at the show, things to think about, and I think a lot of you have done retail shows before, so a lot of the same principles hold true. You know, the same concepts are still going to be important. One of those is to make sure you staff your booth. Be at your booth as much as possible. If you're able to bring a helper, that's always a huge plus, but, you know, obviously that's not always going to be the case. If you can't be at your booth and you've got a helper, there's someone there who can at least kind of hold down the fort while you use the restroom or take a break or whatever. But if you don't have access to that, even just, you know, having the person in the booth next to you, say, could you just keep an eye if someone comes along, let them know I'll be right back, or, you know, here's a card that you can give them or something like that. And I think you'll find most people are willing to help out. The biggest thing is to be approachable. You know, I think we've all been to shows where you see someone kind of sitting in the back of the booth, you know, on a phone or, you know, on a device, and, you know, they don't even realize you're there. I just had that experience last week, as a matter of fact. I'm like, I want to buy these cucumbers, and somebody needs to pay attention. So, you know, don't have a book or tablet or anything like that. You know, be aware of who's around, saying hello, even if it's not a potential customer, if it's someone that's walking by, just being friendly, you know, is important. If it's possible to stand as much as possible, and again, you know, obviously there's fatigue at some point. If you have a helper, then, you know, at least you can take turns having someone standing, or have a high stool. You know, you may want to bring your own, so at least you're eye level with people. So, you know, sometimes if you sit down behind your table, you're kind of hunkered down there behind and people don't see you. You know, this is a big one for me. I'm very guilty of, you know, crossing my arms. It's comfortable, but it's also, you know, not real good body language that welcomes people. So thinking about greeting people, smiling, being positive, you know, just that whole upbeat type of thing. And even, you know, with shows where there's, you know, sometimes peaks and valleys. You might have a couple hours where it's really, really busy, and then it just dies right down and it's quiet. It's hard to stay positive during those times, and especially if you're getting tired, but, you know, trying to remember that, you know, you're kind of on the sales floor basically most of this time. I think the most important thing is to be knowledgeable. And I think you're all already knowledgeable. You know what you're doing. You know what your products are made of. You know how to sell them. But making sure that you convey that to people, being willing to talk to people about your products, how they're made, what you do. You know, a lot of times that can open up, you know, a conversation that could potentially lead to a sale that you know, maybe wouldn't have expected before. Do what you can to draw buyers in. So we talked about, you know, ways to demonstrate, you know, different ways that you can do that. Try to create some interaction and excitement. You know, if you've been at a show before where there's one or two booths that are just drawing everybody, everybody's really excited about it. For whatever reason, there might be something exciting going on there or something real interesting. A crowd draws a crowd. So other people walking through, they go, wow, why is everybody over at that booth? We should go check it out. So, you know, something you can do that's of interest, or, you know, even little silly things like, you know, juggle a little bit, or, you know, just being goofy sometimes, depending on the show, can help to draw people in. When you're interacting with the buyers, some things to keep in mind. Be as clear as possible and to the point. You know, they're there to buy. They're, you know, most of them are there to buy, not browse. So you don't want to spend a lot of time just kind of small talking and beating around the bush. You know, if they're asking questions, be direct, give them the answers they need. Remember that elevator speech and those features and benefits are some things you may want to write out ahead of time and kind of just refresh your mind every once in a while. Know your pricing, know your payment terms, and your turnaround time. Those are all going to be important things that buyers are going to ask you, and they're going to want to know, you know, how long is it going to take to get this shipped to me? You know, can you bill me for it, or do you need my credit card? All of those things you want to make sure that you have spelled out and decided ahead of time. You know, if you've never done a show before, do some role playing, get a friend or a family member, or even if you know a retailer, you know, have them do a little bit of role playing with you so you can kind of get a little bit of experience. Again, making it easy for the buyers to work with you. Have the information and materials that they're going to need ready to go, all those catalogs, the line sheets, your policies, all of that. You want to make sure that your policies and your materials are there to protect you, but you also don't want to place too many restrictions. So there's kind of a delicate balance where, you know, you want to make it easy and convenient for the buyer, but you also want to protect yourself. So just kind of be cognizant of that. And always be collecting leads for follow-up. So even if someone comes and you know, they maybe aren't interested in what you have, where they say, oh, I really like that, but, you know, I'd love it if you had some brighter colors. Say, you know, it just so happens that my spring collection I'm planning right now is going to have some brighter colors. You know, would you like my contact information? Or, you know, whatever you can do to, you know, try to follow up with them in the future if they could be a potential customer. Be ready for those orders. Again, have the order forms ready to go, have some clipboards, the duplicates ready. Really think about your shipping dates when you're talking to buyers. If you're going to be, you know, shipping things to them, they're placing orders. Be really aware of what your production time is, and try to spread your orders out so that you're not, you know, you don't get back from the show and you have to work day and night for, you know, 6 straight months to fill all the orders. If you know you've got a 3-week lead time and you plan enough orders and you've got 3 weeks worth of work, then you want to push the next shipping date out. And the next person that comes, you want to say, well, I can ship that in 6 weeks instead of 3. And then the next, you know, the next person you may want, you know, 12 weeks instead of 6, or whatever the case may be. But you may want to have a calendar or some kind of little schedule that you try to keep track of so that you're not promising things that you can't deliver. Again, first-time orders, the best practice is to require payment up front. Collect the payment information at the show and process the payment before you ship, or, you know, if you can get somebody that's willing to pay right at the show for their order to be shipped in a certain amount of time, fabulous too. But again, especially for that first order, making sure that you're getting payment. And so then, you know, the work doesn't end after you leave the show, obviously. You're going to have some work to do, hopefully, in production and getting those orders out, but some other things to kind of keep in mind to kind of wrap up the show afterwards. Be careful about those ship dates and honor them as best you can. If you do run into a problem with shipping for some reason, if you know something is going to be late, communication is the key. Let the buyer know, hey, you know, I told you I was going to ship this in 3 weeks, but you know, one of my suppliers is late with their delivery, so it's going to be an extra week. You know, again, just address those issues. Don't, if someone expects shipment in 3 weeks and they've waited, 3 months and they haven't heard from you, they're going to be a little upset. Label all the items you ship with item numbers. So again, when you go back to that line sheet, you've got item numbers for everything. Include that on your packaging. It'll save you a lot of time if someone calls and says, hey, I want to order that blue handbag with the gold handle. Maybe you've got 3 different sizes of that, and you can say, well, which size? They go, oh, the little one. If they can give you the item number and it's on the packaging, you can say, okay, great, I know which one that is. I'll send them right out to you. Include a packing list in the shipping box, but again, send that invoice separately. And then following up on leads. So you're not just going to be filling orders, but you're going to want to, kind of organize your contacts after the show. During the show, if you're able to keep notes on, what you've talked to people about, that would be great. So that when you call them or email them or talk to them later on, you can say, hey, we met at the Buyer Day shows, and you were looking at my Adirondack chairs, and weren't sure if you were ready to buy. I just want to let you know I've got some new models coming out. Could I send you some pictures, or whatever the case may be? But something that kind of rings a bell to them so they remember the conversation and the contact. You may want to include some kind of special for after the show to get follow-up with some people, maybe free shipping or a discount or a free display, whatever. And then also include your contacts on your mailing list. And again, as you're collecting those contacts, make sure that people know that that's what it's for. When you mail or email, give them an opt-out option to let you know if they don't want those anymore. But you can use those contacts to invite people to future shows, or if you've got seasonal specials or new products, anything you want to announce to them. A really great tool is something like MailChimp or Constant Contact. You can use those to keep track of your leads and send that information out. And they're I think MailChimp has a free version, and I think Constant Contact may as well. So very low cost or no cost. And then, most importantly, follow up with a business advisor, with the SBDC and or with Lauren for different questions that you might have, specific help that you may want as you move forward. The Canton SBDC contact information is here. It's 315-386-7312. We also have an office in Plattsburgh. Disregard that email because Karen Stalin has since retired, lucky her. So you won't be able to email Karen with that email address, but the phone number is still the same, 518-564-2524, and someone there will, if Plattsburgh is more convenient for you, someone there will be able to help you. If you're from some other areas of the state as well, you can contact either of our offices. We've got 23 centers in New York State, so chances are there's somewhere close to you if Canton or Plattsburgh is not convenient. And I believe you all probably have Lauren's contact information, but if she wants to jump in and include that, she can. So that's really all I have to cover tonight. Are there any more questions? I can hang on if there's any more questions, if people want to throw something up in the chat box there. And again, like I said, certainly give a call or an email if you have, any things that you need follow-up for, or you have questions. Lauren's phone number, thankfully, Lauren, is 518-891-6200. So you can reach her if you have questions about the show or any of the things we talked about tonight. But again, we're here to help you be successful. We want to make sure that you have a really great wholesale show and even better wholesale shows in the future, and that you're doing the things that you need to do to make your business really benefit from these opportunities. So again, remember that when we end the webinar, you'll get a pop-up for a survey and also an email. You don't have to do them both. If you'd like to do them both, go ahead, but you don't have to do both. Whichever's easier for you. Once I have the recording, I will send that out to Lauren and all of you with the attachments, so you will have access to all of that information as well, all the sheets that we covered today. So that should happen. If not by the end of the week, definitely by Monday. Sometimes I just have to wait for the recording to show up in my email. So we'll get that out to you. And again, give us a call if you need anything at all. So if we don't have any more questions, I will end the webinar for tonight. And thank you all for listening to me jabber on. And this was really a beautiful night. I've been sitting here with my windows open and kind of wishing that the outside would clean a little bit more. So have a great night, and hopefully we can help you out with any of the questions that you have in the future.